Well, Enrique, Brazil is a very interesting landscape from a tax perspective and has been incredibly busy over the last year. First off, Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year, Rodney.
But tell me, what actually has been keeping you busy over the last year?
Rodney, I can remember the number of projects we've been involved in during last year, but maybe it's fair to say that there are 3 or 4 different topics that somehow were related to the majority of the projects that we had here in Brazil. And maybe topics that will continue to drive discussions during 2022. In no particular order, maybe tax reform was one of these topics. Tax reform is something that's been there forever, right? But during the last 2 years, 3 years, we've been discussing much more in a concrete fashion because of the bills that have been presented. But especially project 2337 that was presented last year, which was a project aimed at introducing changes to the corporate income tax system. So as it usually happens whenever you have a project, a bill of such magnitude, clients and the market were somehow trying to assess what the scenario would look like if the bill passed. So we were pretty much involved on that as well. Another thing that we should say is the M&A transactions, right? It was a landmark year for M&A deals in Brazil, and for KPMG in Brazil, it was no different. Right, it was a fantastic year in what comes to the number of transactions, and that fact, along with the fact that the structures are complex, clients need to pay attention to details. M&A transactions are on the radar of tax authorities, right? That all together contributed for us to be kept busy during last year. And not only the acquisitions itself or the reorganizations itself, Rodney, but the moment after the acquisition, right? But imagine you are acquiring a business. Of course, from a business perspective, you know what to do, but is there any alternative? Is there any room to maximize tax efficiency? So that's a question that clients were making. So the post-deal value creation also contributed for us to be busy. A third topic maybe are the transactions in the digital economy. That's also driving a lot of work here in Brazil. And maybe fourth topic, as I mentioned, tax supply chain and VCM projects as well.
So just a lot of things going on then, Enrique, a backdrop of tax reform, administrative decisions, and then a very busy M&A market, not to mention other matters. So let me just ask about a couple of those things then, because those are interesting. You mentioned the digitalized economy, and I know a lot of OECD countries are very focused on how to appropriately tax that. I'm interested in your perspective on what's going on in Brazil. Is it similar to what we see in other countries or different?
Yeah, Rodney, that's a good question. But if I may, I won't say that it's even similar or different. I'll just say that it's maybe a matter of priority, right? And the reason why I say that, and as you mentioned, I appreciate that BEPS or BEPS 2.0 is a hot topic for OECD member countries. And I'm not saying it's not relevant for non-OECD member countries like Brazil. It is. So it is that we saw projects, bills being presented 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, trying to introduce OECD-related measures in Brazil, but that just didn't move forward, right? But my point is, from a government perspective, because of the specificities of our tax system, such as taxation at source or different number of taxes that hit transactions in Brazil, be it transactions carried out within the country or transactions involving remuneration of shareholders, cross-border transactions. So pretty much all those transactions are taxed by the different taxes that we have here in the country. So OECD measures is not a priority for the government, or at least doesn't seem to be. And from a taxpayer perspective, because of all these complexities, it seems that the focus are more related to how do I appropriately set up my business? How do I make sure that my shareholder is appropriately remunerated without creating any tax disadvantage? Of course, keeping an eye on what's being discussed in the OECD, but more focus on what we have now in our legislation. So those are pretty much the differences or the specificities that are driving discussions in the digital economy here in Brazil.
Really interesting. So perhaps a relative de-emphasis when compared to other countries, but it can be explained by the already existing features of the Brazilian tax system. So people focus on other things. Interesting. And then I might come back to your whole point around something you raised in the M&A space, that is value creation and value chain management. So looking at the differing parts of business to determine what's actually providing value and what's not. Tell me a bit more about what's going on in that space from your perspective, Henrique.
Well, Rodney, we've been doing VCM projects here in Brazil for quite a while now, tax supply chain VCM projects. And the same drivers that were triggering projects in the past, they are still there, right? So, for instance, the need to revisit the supply chain because an inefficiency has been already identified, or just the fact that my supply chain has been there for a while now. I have a consolidated blueprint, but I don't look at it for a while. So why don't revisit the supply chain to make sure that I'm not losing money? But of course, now we've seen a third element, maybe a disruption caused not only by technology, but also by how clients want to be served, right? So maybe the pandemic has accelerated that, but the fact is customers do not want to wait 5 or 10 days to be served. They want to buy a product and receive it in the next day or so. So that's leading a lot of clients to revisit their supply chain with the purpose of being faster, right? I need to serve my client faster and deliver faster, of course, without reducing my level of service and to the extent possible, improving my level of service. So whenever it comes to revisiting the supply chain in Brazil, tax is an important piece of that puzzle. And that fact, along with all the decisions that we've been seeing recently, that's triggering a lot of new VCM supply chain projects here in Brazil.
So that's really interesting, a real change in the way businesses are looking at how they serve their customers or clients more effectively so as to retain or grow market share. And of course, given the complexity of the Brazilian tax system, that inevitably raises a whole host of direct and indirect tax matters.
That's it.
Oh gosh, and I can also appreciate why you mentioned now that in the context of M&A transactions, value creation and inevitably means taking a look at these different elements of the value chain to see where improvements can be made to enhance customer satisfaction.
That's it, Rodney. That's a very good point, actually, because the VCM projects in some circumstances are a byproduct of the M&A transaction, right? We assist our client with the M&A and afterwards we look at their supply chain.
Just really interesting. Well, gosh, Henrique, well, now I know why everything's so busy in Brazil. You've got a changing backdrop of administrative decisions and law. You've got a busy M&A market, and you've got people refocusing on what's important for customers. No wonder you've been so busy, Henrique.
Yeah, that's right. That's the reason, Rodney.
Well, it's a pleasure having caught up with you in the new year, and I look forward to catching up with you again, Henrique. Till then, stay COVID safe.
Thank you, Rodney. Take care, each other.